Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Post-fight review for Anthony Joshua vs Otto Wallin, and Joshua from start to finish dominated and ended up humiliating Otto Wallin, who just couldn't land basically anything on Joshua, who managed the range, basically beat up Otto Wallin to the body, started to bring in the headshots, busted Wallin up, and at the end of the 5th round, after he'd taken a big right hand which rocked him to his core, his corner pulled him from the fight, and Wallin didn't really protest when they were saying, look, you're done, and it was all over. Anthony Joshua, this was his best performance in a long time. As Eddie Hearn said after the fight, that Joshua was back. And he looked back. He looked all the way back. And I said ahead of the fight that I thought with Ben Davison, the extra technical sort of ability and detail that he would add to Joshua's game, that I expected Joshua would be managing this fight to his pace, and he would be managing the range and basically dictating terms. And Joshua almost punch perfect, and the shots to the body, you could tell that was really softening up Otto Wallin. Right hands, thudding right hands to the liver, and Wallin did not like them. Ultimately, the hook started coming in, there was right hands, he was splitting Wallin's high guard, and Wallin was, over rounds, getting busted up. And he was falling short in return, but what was really curious about this fight, and I have to sort of wonder to myself, did Wallin have some sort of injury, was the strategy. Against Murat Gassiev, boxing and moving on his bike all night, he had 9 or 10 good rounds of really solid movement in that fight. But against Anthony Joshua, who he, in the lead up to this one, had described as mentally frail and basically he was weak-minded, all that sort of stuff, Wallin decided, for some reason, the best strategy was to essentially hold his feet and trade with a big puncher when Wallin himself couldn't knock the skin off a rice pudding. Anything that he did land didn't have a lot on it, and the more that he got sapped, he was basically throwing with nothing on his shots. Joshua was having his way with Otto Wallin. The most dominant performance by Joshua in some considerable time. And I also said in the lead up to this video, Wallin was a Poundland version of Alexander Usyk, and you would see Joshua having been better for those 24 rounds with Usyk and having the ability to deal with the southpaw like Wallin, who is a cut below. And this fight proved that Otto Wallin is a step below and that there are levels. Joshua proved he's still an elite fighter. Wallin, I think, is outside of the top 10. I never bought the notion that he was inside the top 10, and I got a lot of hate for it. But I'm going to say now, Wallin is still a good fighter. Styles make fights, and against certain fighters, he's going to be in some good matchups where he can win. But this matchup for me, with Wallin being the slightly smaller guy who had the disadvantages in height and also both reach, he just was falling short. Joshua was able to manage the range perfectly. He was the one that was able to come in and bust up Wallin with his jab, the 1-2, shots to the body and head. And Joshua, he moves on. It's a big 2023 for him, 3 fights in the bag, and he looked pretty decent for this first fight with Ben Davison, who generally is a safety-first sort of guy, and I think we saw Joshua playing the percentage as well. But against this sort of opponent who doesn't have a huge amount of punching power, you could tell Joshua didn't really respect what Wallin had in terms of what he was throwing out when he was actually catching Joshua with something, which was a very rare occurrence. What we do know is that a fight with Deontay Wilder probably off the table now after Wilder was dominated by Joseph Parker, dropping a decision. Wilder looked woeful in there. Joshua, in comparison, he looked like he was back. He even said himself that he was back and that the heavyweight division is like a game of snakes and ladders and you've just got to try to keep up. But he went on to say that hard work pays dividends. And based on what we've seen, I think against anyone not named Alexander Usyk, who's a southpaw, you know, he can go in there with confidence that he can foot it with most other southpaws in the heavyweight division, albeit there's not really too many at the upper echelon of the division. We've seen the Usyk fights, probably don't need to see that again, but there's opportunities out there for him. Potentially Filip Hrgović. Hrgović is the IBF mandatory. Joshua is the next cab off the rank. Hrgović will eventually get his title shot. If Usyk and Fury have a rematch, then that belt, the IBF, will become vacant. Hrgović will then be against the next highest contender, which at the moment shapes to be Anthony Joshua. So we could see a little bit of waiting and watching in terms of not setting a next fight for a couple of months to see what happens. The undisputed fight is scheduled to happen in February. So a good year for Joshua, and he looked the most confident he has in some time, although he was sort of playing it down after the fight and not really sort of getting too much into his performance, saying it's for others to judge, including his trainer and also the fans. But that performance was dominating. I know that there was a lot of people coming into this saying that Otto Wallin, with his southpaw and his style and his skills, was going to be too tricky. But Joshua's seen a lot better and had some success against Alexander Usyk. It's just that Wallin wasn't quite to the level where he could really trouble Joshua to any real extent. In fact, he had nothing to offer him. This fight was the literal definition of chat, get, and you know the last word. Wallin, with his words, with saying that AJ was weak mentally and fragile, all that sort of stuff, it's backfired horrifically. In fight week, I was sort of getting those Dominic Breazeale, Anthony Joshua type vibes from the interactions, and ultimately it's kind of played out the same with Joshua putting a similar sort of beating on Otto Wallin. And this was a calculated and, yeah, really didn't sort of put too many feet wrong in this one. It was a pretty decent effort. And like I said in the pre-fight video, Joshua's ability as a technical fighter is actually underrated, and he showed against one of the better southpaws in the division. He was able to outbox the guy that was meant to be the better boxer. I think those rounds that he had against Otto Wallin, he knew what to expect and managed the range so well that Wallin really didn't have too much to offer. Still bizarre that Wallin wasn't boxing and moving like he was in the Gassiev fight, but it is what it is. Joshua, he moves on. What did you make of the fight and the performance? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.